Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Downtown Download meeting. On behalf of the Fargo Police Department, welcome, and thank you all for your attendance today. With us, we're going to do some introductions from our department, and then we'd like to hear who all is here in the audience as well. That's beneficial for us to help tailor our presentations moving forward to see who's consuming the information and who's in attendance and what topics are important. So first up, we'll start over here with Chief Sobolski. Downtown Resource Officer Tyler Nord, and Downtown Resource Officer Dean Jordheim. Okay, can we start in the front of the room? Just a name and organization or interest. That is a title. We're happy to have you. Very good. Thank you all. So first up, we'll just go over some agenda items to give you kind of insight as to some of the topics that we're going to speak about today. We're going to go over our calls for service, talk about that a little bit. Crime trends, currently what's happening specific to downtown. We're going to review our aggravated assaults because as we go over the crime trends, you'll see that we have a few of those. We're going to dive into those and talk about the narrative that goes with each of them. Some of the perceptions, a lot of the feedback we receive from residents and business owners alike is some of the perceptions of downtown and some of the behaviors that go with that. So we'll talk about that. Some of the action plans that Fargo PD already has in place and some of the things that we are going to be doing moving forward to round out the rest of the summer and into the fall here. And open discussion at the end, as well as Chief will come up for some conversation and some talking points as well. Please, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to interrupt me. This is informal. Just raise your hand because there is a microphone. Because this is recorded, if you don't speak into the microphone, they won't hear you on the recording. And so this will be shared later. And so we just ask that you raise your hand so that we can get the microphone to you. And I'm going to try to stay put here because when I start wandering, then I disappear from the camera view and the microphone as well. So we'll see how we can do. First up, calls for service. So we're analyzing the period of June and July to give you a time context there. 1,627 total calls for service in the downtown beat. We call that beat 14. That's averaging about 30 calls per service a day. The top call for service driver in this period is 44 at 4th Avenue and Broadway, literally meaning the intersection of 4th Avenue and Broadway. And so if you're a resident or a business owner there, you've seen probably an increase of activity there. We're up approximately 30 to 35 calls for service at 4th Avenue and Broadway compared to last reporting period. So a pretty sharp increase, one of the most prevalent increases we're seeing data-wise. We'll talk about what some of that is, why that's happening, and what we're doing about it as we move forward. The rest of them kind of fall into place as they have in all the previous presentations as some of the higher call for service locations. So crime-wise, you'll see here that we're up year-to-date about 9 aggravated assaults, and we had 7 in this reporting period. And so we'll talk about each of those on a case-by-case basis. Everything else is looking fairly well here. We do have some thefts and criminal mischiefs The thefts are those crimes of opportunity that we talk about month to month, where somebody leaves a wallet at the bar, somebody sets down a cell phone, somebody else comes by and takes it. Also, some of those thefts end up just being shopliftings that the items were not concealed, so therefore it's coded as a theft. But we'll dive into the aggravated assaults to talk about those further. Just before we do that, we'll look at the beat crime comparison. This kind of shows you beat 14, if you can see the numbers on the bottom of the graph there, is the downtown beat. So you can see how we're doing in comparison to the rest of the city for the primary category 1 crimes that we're tracking listed on the right in color-coded context. So launching into the aggravated assaults. The first one here was on July 11th, and we'll kind of work our way backwards to give you a time frame of how this is organized from present to back into June. So time frame about 7 p.m. Somebody that we deal with on a regular basis reported that they had their jaw broke by 2 males outside the VFW within the past week, and that their jaw had actually been wired shut. We've spoken to officers and supporting agencies alike, and there's no indication that this has happened, but they told us it did, and so therefore it was reported. We don't pick and choose who we take reports from, but we can't substantiate that this was a case that had actually occurred. There's no evidence or anything to suggest visibly that there was this type of an injury or this type of medical service that was provided to the individual. And the individual has been made contact with multiple times throughout this time frame. So uncertain if it occurred or not, but we just don't have the evidence to support a charge at this time. Next, we have July 11th at about 6 p.m. A male was found unconscious in the area of 4th Avenue Broadway, which is that high call for service area that we'll continue to talk about today. Male was drinking and consuming pills, could not recall being in a fight or who the suspect was, but stated that he was hit in the face. He was taken to the hospital for intoxication and for being suicidal. There were no visible injuries to the male's face, but he did have a scrape on his head. Through officers' continued investigation and follow-up, they were able to determine that the witnesses said that he probably was knocked unconscious. Officers identified and located and arrested Matthew Falcon for aggravated assault as a result of that case. And so Matthew's picture there on the right. So that case is currently pending the state's attorney for charges there. He's in custody. July 10th, around noon, 300 block North Broadway. So 4th Avenue would be the intersection just to the north of that location. Intoxicated male was punched in the face, causing disfigurement to his nose, and a witness stated he lost consciousness. The victim was transported to the hospital to be treated. The suspect was identified by officers, and a report is being forwarded to the state's attorney's office for charges. The victim is no longer seeking prosecution or willing to cooperate or participate in that investigation further. So far you'll see already that the trend is tending to be intoxicated individuals downtown, 1 or 2 strikes, and then typically as we continue here, you'll see that the person falls and hits their head and is knocked unconscious, not necessarily from the punch, but probably from landing on the ground. July 6th at about 1 a.m. in the 200 block of North Broadway, a male was struck in the arm by a rock. There was an individual riding a bike, and the individual threw a rock from the bike at a person on the sidewalk and struck them on the arm, therefore prompting the assault. July 5th at about midnight, officers were getting Michael Johnson, who is pictured in the top right of the screen, cleared to the hospital to take him to detox. He was intoxicated downtown. In the process, Johnson kicked one of our officers in the genitals, causing significant pain, and then Johnson was arrested for assault. June 22nd at 6 p.m., 3rd Avenue North and Broadway. So you can see the trend here. We're continuing to kind of hit that 3rd Avenue, 4th Avenue. Broadway is kind of the hot spot right now. Paul Standing Crow punched another male in the face, knocking him unconscious. The victim was transported to the hospital. Standing Crow was identified as the suspect by witnesses, and then officers located Standing Crow later at the same location. He actually left for a little bit and then came right back to where the assault had occurred. Officers followed up, trying to track him down, located him, and arrested him for the aggravated assault. So that case is also pending prosecution with the Cass County State's Attorney's Office. June 19th, About bar close time, a little after, outside the Northern Gentlemen's Club, two males got into a fight. One male was knocked unconscious as a result. The victim was transported to the hospital, and then officers located Christopher Sines in the 200 block of North Broadway and made an arrest for the aggravated assault of the victim. He's pictured on the top right. June 16th, about bar close, parking lot of the Northern again, argument ensued over a minor property crash. One of the males punched the other male in the face. He fell to the ground, striking his head on the ground and rendering him unconscious. And officers attempted to stop the suspect, but he fled on a motorcycle at a high rate of speed, of which they did not pursue him. Victim has since become uncooperative and declined intentions on prosecution in cooperation with the police department. Officers are continuing to investigate the case, however. Next, we have June 15th, about bar close again, 200 block of North Broadway. Several individuals that we deal with on a fairly regular basis got into a fight over $20. One of the males punched the other individual 10 to 15 times and knocked the individual unconscious. The victim was uncooperative and refused to provide info to officers. The officers were still able to identify, locate, and speak with the suspect. That is being sent over for consideration as well. Who has a question before we get further into this? So that we're diving through the egg assaults here. We're about to transition to a different topic. Anything on the egg assaults? So if I could summarize them for you, we have about half that are kind of in the daytime hours and half are kind of about the bar close hours. It tends to be two different groups of people per se, right? So the daytime ones tend to be in-group fighting of people that know each other that get into an argument over, say, $20 or something, and it's usually one punch, the individual falls, hits their head, and then is unconscious, creating an aggravated assault. The bar close ones tend to be alcohol-driven fights or disturbances after people are highly intoxicated over seemingly small things, property crash, for example, that we talked about. And then, once again, somebody usually hits their head on the ground, knocking them unconscious, creating an aggravated assault classification. Terrorizing, so another concern, right? July 13th at about 7 p.m., an officer was in the Spicy parking lot watching a group gather at the corner of 4th Avenue and Broadway. So obviously we recognize that this is a high call for service area. We have officers that are doing extra patrol in that area to try to work on some of those issues, and makes an observation of an individual actually pull a knife out of his pocket and start approaching another individual while the officer is standing there watching. Before the officer is able to approach and intervene, the individual quickly puts the knife away and ultimately was identified and arrested for terrorizing. On the 4th of July, about 2 in the afternoon, officers located individuals consuming alcohol at 4th Avenue and Broadway. Michael Luring was one of the individuals consuming alcohol. During the investigation and detention, he became uncooperative and tried to get away from the officers. He was arrested for resisting a police officer and later for terrorizing after he told the officer that he was going to murder him, further stating, "When I get out, I'm going to shoot you in the face." July 1st, a little after bar closed, Blair Whitten tried breaking back into the old Broadway. They were already closed. Bouncers told her she could not come inside. She then threatened them and said, "I'm going to come back and murder you when you leave." She tried to kick an officer while they were walking into jail, so she was arrested for several charges, including terrorizing and attempted assault on a police officer. Any questions on the terrorizing incidents? All right, so shots fired downtown. This occurred on June 24th. I'm assuming most people in here are fairly familiar with this incident. It was heavily publicized. About bar close, once again, 300 block of Robert Street, stemming from a disturbance that started at Fort Knox Bar. The suspect was threatening to shoot people inside the bar, and it was reported that as officers were responding to that call for service, males started shooting out the driver's window of a vehicle. The vehicle pictured here is the actual suspect vehicle of where the shots came out of. After further investigation, detectives arrested 30-year-old Abishir Muhammad Hussein of Pelican Rapids, Minnesota for felony reckless endangerment, which is the attributed charge for discharging a weapon in a populated place. So some of the obstacles with some of these investigations that often gets overlooked is that it's sometimes challenging when we don't have a cooperative victim. I know this in reviewing reports this month that there's several times where we are able to even identify the suspect after interviewing witnesses and doing a follow-up investigation. And sometimes the victim doesn't want to cooperate, either by way of not providing information or not wanting to press any sort of charges, which makes it a little bit challenging. Some of this is derived through the fact that people think they can kind of perform their own street justice. Sometimes they tell our officers, we'll take care of it. I'll handle this on my own, which creates to furthering the problem, right? So now we have one victim one day is now the suspect the next day, and this is the type of culture that we're trying to intervene in, right? So, but finding successful ways to prosecute those cases has some challenges, but I'd like to offer you one example. One of our DROs was well in tune with some of the individuals that frequently regulated out the downtown area, and we knew that individual was actually the victim of an aggravated assault, had been turned into the hospital for some head injuries from an assault. We recognized this pattern can be a vicious cycle, and so it was like 3 or 4 days later, the officer found that individual downtown again and reapproached them. And this individual at the hospital basically said a bunch of expletives that wasn't going to cooperate with us as the victim. But later, after 4 days of being able to kind of change frame of mind, our DRO, who was well in tune and in the know with this individual and had a working relationship through frequent contacts of being downtown, was able to gain a rapport and actually transition that case to one that is possibly something that can be prosecuted. So that's one example of a way that we try to navigate those issues, and it stems from our DROs being well in tune with what's happening down there and having working relationships with individuals. So, any questions thus far? Feel free. We have one. Good. You gonna make her come up front?
Okay. Here we go.
Thank you. It's interesting because you've got a lot of pending and it's very early because it's just a month. But when they are prosecuted, what's the outcome?
Sure. So it obviously depends on the charges for things, right? And so the state's attorney is the one who recommends charges on that behalf. It's not necessarily the officer that handles the case. The officers compile all the information, the facts, both inculpatory and exculpatory evidence, and then they send it to the prosecutor's office. And ultimately, that's their decision, right? But for a lot of these, you're looking at a short amount of jail time, less than a year in almost all cases, for sure. Maybe a combination of some probation, depending on the person's criminal record. There's certainly a lot of variables that go into that. I don't have a specific average of sentence for you per se, but it's not a significant sentence by any means. They're usually back out on the street again in a fairly short amount of time. Thank you for the question. Anybody else?
I just have a question about over-serving. So you're seeing a lot of aggravated assaults at bar close time. For example, you had 2 just in that period of time at the Gentlemen's Club. Is there any investigation into over-serving at our downtown bars? Any way that we can try to mitigate that over-serving that leads to those assaults?
Yes, certainly. Our officers are always trying to investigate those types of things. If we have reason to believe that the individual was overserved, they're failing to take care of themselves as somebody we feel maybe shouldn't be served, obviously the first step is being able to try to confirm where they were consuming the alcohol at. Sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. Oftentimes people drink at multiple places, but by way of reporting that, we do police reports and liquor establishment forms for any of those types of violations. And the officers will go into the establishment and try to investigate those instances as they arise. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Okay. All right, so transitioning to perception now, right? So that's like factual crime data, highlighting some of the key issues of assaults, terrorizing, meaning threats, threatening behavior. But then we also, when we walk around and we talk to business owners and residents downtown, there's kind of the perception of how it feels. So we're not seeing a lot of random people being assaulted on the sidewalks or anything like that. There's just not a lot of random violence happening. That's not the case factually, but some of the perceptions are derived by comments as simple as, you have pretty blue eyes, and it came from an individual sitting on the sidewalk or on a bench, and the interaction was unwanted. And the individual feels uncomfortable. I'm just trying to walk to work. I don't want this engagement with the individual. And sometimes it's more demanding where, hey, can I get some money? More of a panhandling thing. And so as a police department, we're constantly trying to navigate illegal versus protected acts or protected speech, right? People have the freedom of speech. They can say things as long as it's not threatening to the individual, right? And so saying you have pretty blue eyes doesn't allow us to do much criminally, right? However, asking for money downtown is panhandling, which is illegal. It's a non-criminal offense, $50 fine, and we are interested in enforcing that. The common thing that we run into there is that also kind of requires a victim, right? Where if Chris is walking downtown and someone says, hey, Chris, I want $10. We get a pretty wide range of responses when we approach that person, believe it or not. You may think that they want to run to court and prosecute the individual, but I've actually been yelled at, why are you bothering that poor person? And so it's not as clear cut as you may think, right? So there's kind of two different channels there. We'll talk a little bit more big picture about citations and enforcement in the downtown and kind of what we're doing to work around some of those issues here in a little bit. But that's kind of the general theme. And so as we look at what we can do about some of that, we'll dive into that 2 more slides from now. So I want to give you 2 different examples of disturbances downtown when we talk about perspective, right? So this first one, officers are called for a male screaming, yelling curse words, trying to fight other individuals outside the Empire Bar, causing a big disturbance downtown. I'm sure everybody can attest to having seen something similar in their life at some point. Officers rush to the area to try to help with the issue, identify they know who the individual is, they've dealt with the individual several times, and the individual starts screaming at the officers as well. It's a very confrontational, very agitated person. The downtown resource officers recognize how to de-escalate some of these individuals, and after they do that, they realize the person's actually the victim of an assault, and that's what's upsetting them. To a passerby, they wouldn't know that though, right? It just looks like someone causing a disturbance, but the person's actually the victim of a crime. And DRO Jordheim was actually the one that was on this particular example. This is a real life example. And he was able to de-escalate this individual. It took probably 5 or 10 minutes of getting screamed at on Broadway, but was able to de-escalate the individual, start an investigation into the assault that had occurred, figure out who's fighting with who down on Broadway so we can stop that vicious cycle that we're talking about where a victim one day is a suspect the next day. And then also get the individual the services they need that day to de-escalate and get them off of Broadway and get them calmed down. So we actually walked hand in hand with the individual over to the Harm Reduction Center at 222 4th Street North. And then they were able to actually help us out that way and connect the person, get them calmed down. The individual later resurfaced on Broadway in a much different tone and demeanor and was good for, we saw the individual 4 more times, 5 more times, and the rest of the night was doing just fine. So sometimes it's not what it might appear to be, where the individual is always someone that gets rushed off to jail. Sometimes we take a different approach once we know the information, right? A different example, kind of the opposite of that. Someone is yelling, this is Chris, this is the example where we were trying to have a meeting, and Chris actually pointed out, hey, there's an individual over here as we're walking down Broadway to go to a meeting that probably needs your attention. And the individual screaming at the top of their lungs right in the middle of Broadway, right outside of where White Banner was, kind of at that intersection there. And everybody's turning their heads and looking. It's causing a huge disturbance. And so I walk over to the individual, and he immediately turns at me and starts pumping on his chest and screaming expletives and this whole deal. And I can see the individual's in some sort of crisis, right? Not thinking very clearly. So what I did was I called for another officer so we could get more officers there to handle the individual appropriately. We're not trying to start a fight or anything like that. And so once we got the appropriate amount of resources there, we were able to de-escalate the individual and talk to him. We eventually ended up arresting him because he was causing this disturbance downtown, and he actually had outstanding warrants as well. But that's going to play into the rest of what we're going to talk about here today is that solved the issue for the day, but how do we prevent that from happening? Because it wasn't just a day issue. There's underlying problems there, right? So jail served as a timeout, but the individual's going to come right back out, and then how do we continue to work with that individual? We already kind of touched on this a little bit, but certainly as law enforcement, we have enforcement opportunities. And so that's us down there enforcing laws by way of arrest and citation. We did a fair amount of that. We had 120 citations in June and July. A lot of our focus was on consuming alcohol in public. We had 88 citations just in June and July consuming alcohol in public downtown. Because we recognize that that is what leads to a lot of the other negative behaviors that occur there, right? When people get highly impaired and intoxicated, they start fights, they start yelling, they're more brave, they're more brazen. If they have mental illness or other chemical addictions, the increased amount of alcohol just plays against all of that. And so we certainly do our part to try to enforce that by way of citation. However, we know that by writing a citation, it doesn't resolve the issue still once again, right? Just real quick for COPs or foot patrols. So this is what we're tracking for officers out there engaging. And this is just the downtown resource officers, mind you. This isn't officers as a whole. This is just tracked by the DROs, which is your three DROs. 112 proactive community-oriented policing activities with 200 hours of foot patrol logged for June and July. So some of the things that we'll talk about, what's the bigger picture resolution that we're working on? Citations are good, jail's good for timeouts, but how do we stop having repetitive contacts with the same individuals over and over again? And really what it comes down to is behavior problems, mental illness, chemical addiction, lack of medication that maybe they should be taking. That's a big bucket of stuff for law enforcement to take on out there on the side of the road on a day-to-day basis, right? And so it takes more than Fargo PD. And so we have a lot of great partnerships. One of the biggest ones we have is with the Harm Reduction Center. They're constantly helping us, and you'll hear a lot more about them. We're going to have them come up and talk about a few slides of some of the statistics so that you can get insight into that partnership that we do have with them. And then what we're calling kind of the community care plan, right? So we're trying to figure out how do we get everybody at the table that can contribute to resolving this issue. And this issue touches a lot of care providers, right? The ambulance service, the ERs, mental health service, the police department, Harm Reduction Center, there's housing, there's just endless different aspects that this affects. And so those meetings are taking place. We have another one tomorrow. And so we're trying to formulate more of an action plan on a global scale that we can resolve some of the underlying issues that are driving some of this behavior. Also social media, one of the biggest feedbacks we get from businesses downtown is that it seems like it just takes one bad Facebook post or one bad news article and it gives everybody this negative image of downtown, which isn't true. I mean, that you see the crime numbers, it's not a dangerous place to be per se, right? Like law enforcement's down here on a daily basis and we're doing everything we can. And it's a safe place to come work, thrive, and live, right? And so we're gonna be more active on a social media platform to help kind of balance the message there a little bit and show some of the behind the scenes truths and what the activities are that Fargo PD is doing. And so what we're considering tagging that is walking together, working together, downtown together is gonna kind of be the slogan for that. And the Downtown Community Partnership has been a great asset into helping to develop that as well. So crime reduction details, right? So we talked about 4th and Broadway how many times today? So what can we do in the short term to help resolve that issue? Long term, we're excited that the new police substation will be like spitting distance, right? That'll help. But in the short term, how do we help combat some of those calls for service that are driving a lot of the impaired individuals, the disturbances? And so what we're working on now is kind of some extra details. So we have our patrol officers that staff the city 24/7, 365. We have our 3 DRO officers that are down here from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. strategically when we have the most problems or interactions. And we're also going to do some additional enforcement just specific at those hot spots. So 4th Avenue and Broadway is a hot spot right now. And so we're going to put additional officers in that area with specific crime attention details to try to combat some of those things. And so we'll report back the results of that and kind of what we came up with as we move forward so you can get the full picture of that. But that's still in the planning stages right now. That's kind of a short-term plan. And then open communication. A lot of people have asked, hey, I run an apartment complex. How do I share this information like today with the residents? Or hey, I'm in charge of a business. How do I share with my employees the facts of what's happening downtown? And so we've moved to this location with a recorded format which causes me to try to stand still, and I struggle with it, so that we can share that, and so it can be put out on a link so that it can be followed up on and shared with everybody. So that's some of what is going on proactively. What are we doing, right? Who has some questions, comments, concerns? Chris? Good question.
Just how does one get invited to the table for the community care plan meetings?
Yes. I know that the chief has been in communication with them about that and having like a DCP representative for the group as part of that meeting. Chief, do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. So first, Chris, thanks for all your years of service here. Appreciate that. I hate to see you move on, but you've done a lot for the bid. And you're passing the baton right there? Okay. Big shoes to fill, but good. The kind of the partnership consortium that Sergeant Halverson's been referring to, we've been meeting for a couple of months, both with Sanford, Essentia, basically all the partners. Harm reduction is there. Local law enforcement, all the groups that partner here. And so, in fact, at the meeting tomorrow, I'll discuss getting downtown. That's already come up. But the first couple of meetings, we were broadly trying to identify areas of redundancy. And all of you probably know this, right? What harm reduction does and can do is different than what Essentia or Sanford or all these other facilities can do. Some of it's overlap and some of it leaves gaps. And so we're trying to get all of those entities aligned into identifying where is their best level of service, and then so that we can use them as judiciously as possible and get more out of all of those services. So we're working at that level. As we start to work down, we're going to have subcommittees of different things. Certainly the downtown Fargo and the business district and all that is a part of that. So Sergeant Halverson is actually, I've just got him in tomorrow. We're to the level where we're starting to bring in the line level staff and start to get some of that worked out. And they've got some plans put together. Ultimately, what we really need is resources in terms of mental health and homelessness. And it's not necessarily always money. We need personnel. Those folks need personnel who are interested and committed in doing the work. I think we probably also need additional facilities for those staff and places to go for those folks. So the degree to which we can expand that, I think, helps us a lot from a law enforcement perspective and from the business and community perspective of being able to pass off people who are in those crises quicker, and we have places for them to go. Because right now, I think, I'm sure they could give you the specifics, but it seems like they're pretty much at capacity all the time. And there's still a lot of people that are walking around with no place to go, so they're on 4th and Broadway, right? And so that creates some of those issues. But we are definitely working along those lines to try and grow that, and we'll certainly get our downtown business partners involved.
Any other questions right now? All right. Like I talked about, one of the biggest partnerships and most beneficial partnerships we've had is with the Harm Reduction Center. And so I'd like to invite up Jillian of the Harm Reduction Division to talk about that partnership a little bit and some of the statistics and information as far as outreach and engagement in the downtown community. I don't know.
So, good morning. I'm Jillian Gould. I'm the Homeless Outreach Coordinator for the Harm Reduction Division. I know most of you are familiar with our programs, but we wanted to make sure that everybody understood what we are doing to address these issues in our community. You can see all of our programs listed here. Started out with the Gladys Ray Shelter over 13 years ago now, and we are rapidly expanding. Excuse me, as I talk too fast, I drank too much coffee this morning. We also operate Detox. My program is Street Outreach. I also supervise our mobile outreach program. Jordan in the back there runs our Harm Reduction Center, which is our Safe Syringe program. And then we are working to get the engagement center up and running, but we are having a staff shortage. So if anybody knows anybody that is looking for a job, send them our way. We want to get that up and running. So yeah. I wanted to cover what our mobile outreach program does. Many of you are probably familiar with seeing my crew out on the street in an unmarked black SUV that looks like a retired squad car, right? So that has been in existence now since 2018. And I wanted to show kind of what they do. So their main goal is to respond to individuals in a crisis related to their substance use. So somebody passed out on a bench, somebody sleeping in the stairwell of the Roco ramp, somebody that is out at the hospital needs to go to detox, or maybe somebody that's at our detox that is hitting withdrawal and needs to go to the hospital, vice versa, right? As that program has grown over the years, we've just gotten more and more busy. We just received funding to duplicate this program, and as you can see, we're doing a lot. 239 transports is a lot in a month. I mean, sometimes my staff are back-to-back on transports. But I wanted to highlight what they're doing when they're not transporting, which is that street outreach contact. Over 1,000 in a month. Some shifts, staff are talking to over 40 people in a shift. And housing supports, right? So we can get people housed, but if they don't have the right supports to keep their housing, they're gonna end up back out on the street. I think it's important too to highlight how many of our transports are initiated by our staff. 49 out of 239. It's a lot, and oftentimes if my staff weren't out there initiating that and having that conversation and saying, hey man, maybe you need to take a break today, let's get you a good nap, a sandwich, a bottle of water, and we can talk about some resources. Chances are if my staff weren't doing that, law enforcement would end up dealing with them later in the day anyways. So trying to take that pressure off the department so that they can respond to the more important issues and not be dealing with something that really isn't a police issue. That is highlighting our numbers for June and July. And that is what I have. I think I went the wrong way. Oh, and then I'd like to invite Leah. Leah is our housing coordinator. We've seen quite a bit of change with housing, folks experiencing homelessness, and she's amazing at it, and she can explain it way better than I can.
Jillian, how is, you just talked about additional funding, and how is this infrastructure, because this has been backbone for responding to really people with significant needs. How is your funding and where is it coming from?
Yeah, so our funding for all of our programs comes from various sources. One of the benefits of COVID is that we've gotten additional funding through the state and the federal government. So that is the majority of the funding that we've received to duplicate mobile outreach is from that. That also will help fund the engagement center, help fund some training opportunities for staff, things of that nature. So that's one highlight of COVID is that there's more money available. So basically, we can use that money to show the benefit of the work that we do to hopefully then add it into our budget once that funding is gone.
Can I ask one more? Jillian knows me too well. I think the other piece is it's good that you've been able to get some federal and state money into this program. What about federal and state partnerships on the direct service delivery side? How is that going?
It's, that's another benefit of COVID. We have great partnerships with the state. The Behavioral Health Division is a huge partner in the work that we do, and we certainly couldn't do the work we do without them. Leah.
I was waiting for Kathy to ask another one. All right, so one of the things that we don't talk about as much is trying to get people out of the shelter and into homes of their own. And so we decided that we were gonna start trying to get some numbers out there for everybody. So I don't have it on here, but I really wanna say something about 2020 and COVID. A lot of other vouchers did come up and we were able to actually house 43 people last year out of the shelter. 32 of those people are still in housing. Some are working to get rehoused after being evicted / vacating their units. We've been able to work with a lot of landlords. If somebody has a housing voucher and they get evicted, they're gonna lose that voucher. If they choose to vacate the unit on a certain day with the landlord, they get to keep that voucher and then we just rehouse them again. So I think it's huge. That is the most we have ever housed out of the shelter in 1 year. This year, we're kind of on track with that. We've got our first quarter numbers. We have housed 12 people out of the shelter. We have some other partners that help with a lot of that housing. 4 of those people were actually housed with, say, Southeast Human Service Center. Their case managers helped with that. But the other 8, right? I'm really bad at math. Were housed directly from myself and our team. This second quarter, we're at 11 right now. We do currently have the total of 22 housed. We have one that passed away, and then there are 2 that are facing eviction / vacating the units right now. We're trying to get them to vacate. But that's still really good numbers, saying that we still have, even if those 2 leave, we still have 19 people housed this year, which is huge. At the moment, we're working on getting some more vouchers. I know the high rise isn't filling their units over there because they're moving everybody out, but they have been doing housing vouchers with the extra units that they had. It's whatever. It's a big thing, how it worked out. But we've applied for a lot of those. Those are 6 of the pending ones that we have right now, and we're submitting more. And I have one person currently with a voucher, another one is getting one next week. So then again, we're gonna start getting them going again also. And we have a partnership with Presentation Partners in Housing, where they have been able to pick up and do some housing navigation and case management for us. We keeping that partnership. The city of Fargo put money. We collaborated with them so that we could have 2 specific housing navigators for our programs. Because like Jillian was saying, we can get people housed, that's great, but if we don't have the supports to keep them there, then they're just gonna come back out. So we are doing everything we can to get people into housing as quick as we can. Anybody have any questions on it? Yes.
So how or what can community people or businesses do to support you and others with housing and other initiatives? I mean, you have some funding, but what can we be doing as individuals or businesses?
Some of the things that we have, donations are one. We don't have a huge space to hold donations, and we're working with some other partners to be able to have items for people when they move into housing. We like just sending people our way. If you're seeing them out there, if they're not getting connected with me, I do most of the work in the shelter with housing stuff. Jillian still does some with the people that are sleeping outside that just aren't connected with those services. So sending them our way. My office is and will be staying at the engagement center. I still have a part-time one that'll be at the shelter once we get back to our regular location. But just sending people our way is a big one. But if you did want to look at any kind of donations or something just to help, because I moved somebody into housing 2 weeks ago, and we busted butt to find a truck, and one of our gentlemen, our peer support specialist, Damon over there, he helped so that she actually had a couch and a bed and things when we moved in that day. That's another hard piece, is just coming up with, we're working on getting a vehicle to help with transportation, but right now I am literally anybody. Jan, I used her truck that day because I don't got to pick up. So it's things like that, being able to come up with a vehicle too, until we have one specific to that program. Landlords. Yes, landlords. Landlords that are willing to give people a chance is a big one. I have a couple in my back pocket. One of them is an old landlord of mine, and he's rented to quite a few people over the years. And, you know, I fight with them, but I'm like, dude, you're gonna rent to them and it's gonna go well. And more often than not, it has. So finding people willing to give a chance, because that's one of the hugest things.
Are you working with the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency at all, and the funds that they've been issued through COVID? I get emails from them. My previous history is in the affordable housing world, and I know that there's a large sum of money that is supposedly going to be allocated at some point through the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency, and they're also providing back assistance for those that are in need. Just wondering if you have any involvement with them.
We aren't super involved. We do try to apply for some of their units at times when, like the Burrell and different things, people want to live over there because that's who they're run by. We don't have a huge collaboration with them or anything. I know that when I go to, anytime somebody needs help, if they get behind on their rent or something like that, we generally do the 211 now, because that's the new process to get in there for any assistance, but that is assistance that they're working on too. We were just in a meeting and they were talking about that yesterday. Anything else? All right, I'll let her take over again.
So as you're walking, I'll just ask my questions. Yeah, just to her. So it doesn't sound like budgeting is, financing, all that's there. What steps are being taken to get personnel hired? I know you said that's a constraint and everybody's struggling right now, but at some point you have to look at what incentives are being offered, how do we get people to Fargo that with the skills? So what steps are being taken to get this problem resolved sooner than later?
Yes, so we are currently interviewing at least 3 to 5 candidates a week. We have a high no-show rate, which is something that I think our entire community is facing. We have had conversations with leadership to see about getting a pay increase for our advocates. It is difficult to expect somebody to come and work in the crazy environment we work in at the pay rate that we are at, when they could work at Amazon for 25 bucks an hour. So we're constantly having conversations and trying to get that in place to better support the staff that we have. And just really trying to be creative. We've met with HR about our recruiting. Can we make a video that shows kind of a day in the life of an advocate, because every day is different. So trying to think outside the box and trying to stay afloat, really.
Thanks. And then my second question is, could you give an update on Gladys Ray as far as what that looks like, when that might be back up and running on First Avenue South?
Yes, so for those of you that aren't aware, we started our first ever remodel at the Gladys Ray Shelter, which is over on First Avenue South, last year. We started actually last May with the goal of being finished by January 1st. Unfortunately, in the middle of that remodel, we found out that our building had a significant amount of black mold. So we had to do mold remediation, which then in January, because of that black mold, we had to move the shelter temporarily to the engagement center downtown, the former police department. So we've been housing the shelter there for the last 7 months, which has not been easy, I'm not gonna lie. We're excited to get back into our building. The last building update I think we got was September. Unfortunately, every time we have a building update, it seems to get pushed a month, just pushed. We want to be back in 1519 for the shelter. It just works better with having detox located there. Staff are able to support each other better. The environment is just more conducive to having conversations with our guests to get that rapport and that relationship piece there. We are doing everything we can to be back there. So that is the update on that.
Thank you, Jillian and Leah. Thank you both very much. We have seen great success when they talk about housing, individuals that are housed. Something changed. There it is. Maybe it's just in my head, sorry. But typically, people that end up in housing are people that we're not dealing with, say, at 4th and Broadway any longer. So certainly a good partnership and good resolution there as well. We're going to round this out and then open it up to just open discussion. Maybe something we had in here will prompt a question or a different topic for you, so we can shift gears if you'd like. But just want to encourage everyone, if you have residents or you're an advocate here for an employer, for example, we encourage, if there's a problem downtown, that you get a hold of us. If there's somebody panhandling, we're happy to come deal with that. So we just encourage you to help us out by being a good witness or a good victim, and timely reporting, good descriptions, and being present with information, so that when we arrive, we can do good investigations and come to those areas where there's problems. So we encourage you to utilize us as the police department. Get a hold of us. We're here to help. We can't be everywhere at once, so certainly your guidance is needed to help direct us to where there's issues happening and occurring at. So that being said, who has the first question? Okay. Anybody have any questions before the chief?
With all the issues on 4th and Broadway, I know you said you will have increased police presence. Is there any other things, some environmental factors that you've considered to help that people that group there move someplace else, have someplace else to go?
Yeah, good question. Thank you, Laura. We've brainstormed some ideas, and we anticipate meeting with some of the business owners on a more regular basis there. We have been doing that. We've been stopping in there almost daily, if not daily, weekly, with several of the businesses in that area to have that collaboration and partnership. We've had some creative ideas that are maybe a little bit off the wall, right? But we're willing to try just about anything. One of the environmental design issues that seems to take place there's that vacant lot just north of Spicy Pie. And so it seems to be an area that people feel there's a little bit of privacy, even though it's in the middle of Broadway, but there's like no pressure of people doing business there. One of the things we looked at was Broadway Square, a lot of places to sit, but it's so overwhelmingly popular with everybody else that there's just not a lot of problems there. It kind of pushes the problems outside of the square. And so trying to have that same environmental impact is certainly something that we're open to. So if anybody has any specific ideas that could be entertained there, we'd be happy to help communicate and collaborate with the businesses and individuals that are down there. Did that answer your question, Laura? Any other questions for me before Chief Sobolski talks?
Are there specific hours that our downtown resource officers are present?
Yes, ma'am. So the chief and command staff looked at everything as a whole, data-driven when the DROs were placed on a schedule. And so that schedule based on highest need for call volume, type of call, amount of officers, and some of the downtown problems that are reoccurring in nature. So they specifically work 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. That's kind of the gap that they bridge. And they have 7 days a week coverage, assuming that someone isn't injured on vacation, that type of stuff. But they're split up, the three of them are split up so that they can rotate weekends and all that stuff so that we have that 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. coverage 7 days a week, in addition to the beat officers that work 24/7, 365. Those are additional resources to that. Anybody else? Okay, Chief?
Thank you, sir. Right on point, your question on presence and officers. So the preliminary budget that the commission got this week, for the most part, supports the department reorganization that was put forward, including some additional officers and other permanent detective positions that will help the department organize in a fashion that allows us to have the most capacity. So we've already done the shift change schedule to provide the most capacity with what we have. But we have a number of current vacancies. We have a recruit academy that's graduating August 6th, and we have a number of people in background. So we will be hiring a number of new officers in early September, in addition to additional spots that the budget supports. So as we get those people on board and into the, on the bricks, if you will, you'll see some increased presence. Part of that will allow us to add some positions to the downtown resource officer group. Matt Niemeyer is currently out injured because he was walking so much he messed up his ankle. That's why he's limping in that picture. And so no one walks quicker than Dean, but we're looking at, you know, bolstering the presence a little bit, and they've got bicycles as well. We're also looking at some technology, maybe even the use of a Segway or two, to allow them to get places quicker downtown and get into areas that they, you know, when they're huffing back and forth. And I walked the night with Dean, and it was a lot of walking, which is good. But if we're on one end, we need to get somewhere else quicker, you know, there's some technology that maybe we can put in place. So we will be increasing the presence in addition to overall police presence in the beats. So that's forthcoming, and that's just a product of everybody's shorthanded, just like harm reduction and everyone else. But everyone here is doing everything they can with the resources available, including all of you, who are all, you know, together. We're very important. The partnership is really important to keeping downtown nice and safe. And aside from some of the perceptions, it is very safe compared to almost any other city. We have big city issues that we have to deal with, but we have really good partners, and we're working on ideas and concepts to come up with different options to help address that. We just had a very successful street fair, right? There was, I don't know how many tens of thousands of people here. Nothing bad happened. Everybody had fun. Okay, so that's a good sign. You know, not every city can say that. So while we kind of deal with the issues of the day, I think it's important to keep in mind, you know, the businesses, the restaurants, all of that that's actually flourishing downtown, and as we're coming out of this COVID dilemma. The other thing I wanted to talk about is you might have heard that there's been a new focus on liquor establishments, and there is. I think over time that was an area that the officers were dealing with, but for a variety of reasons, that information wasn't getting organized in a fashion where it got pushed forward to liquor control and elected officials so that we could basically hold licensed premises accountable too, to make sure that they're running. We want them to be successful. We love to see the businesses down here, not just downtown, but all over, be successful, but they also have to have a safe business operation and have to follow the law. So there's a new process in place for that. I think that's already showing itself to be very successful. The Liquor Control Board has been reconstituted. So I'm no longer a member of the board. I'm one of the staff presenting information to the board. And our department members, if they get sent to a liquor establishment for whatever reason, are filing an additional quickie report with the details. And these aren't all negative, these are also good. So later today at the liquor control meeting, I'll have a number of them in which we have reports from establishments that actually did good things, did the right things, called us for the right reasons. We worked together and solved problems, and then there's a couple of issues with some of them as well that will have to be addressed. So I think that's a new perspective that not only helps with some of the, if you will, maybe disorder or alcohol-related issues for the evening crowd, also creates a little safer environment for everyone. But just like everything else, if establishments know that we are watching, the ones that might be marginal now will start to shape up and come into conformity, so that's going to help as well. So that's kind of been a big push the last couple of months across the board with elected officials and the police department. So I think that's going well. The other thing to bring up for discussion and thought is the other part of the issue sometimes is jail capacity and courts. And someone asked a question about, hey, what happened to that person? First, just to clarify, in North Dakota, we can't arrest someone for a misdemeanor unless it's a drunk driver, huffing, and there's one other innocuous one that hardly ever, domestic violence, that's not innocuous. But there was another one that's not as popular. Absent those 4 misdemeanors, if I punch out Sergeant Halverson, it's a simple assault, and I walk away, and you call us, which you should, all we can do is we come there, we can stop the person, question them, we'll talk to the victim, of course, who we need to cooperate and say, our legal system is based on the fact that we have a victim, a credible, reliable, willing victim to say, yep, this happened to me, and if need be, I'll appear in court to testify against that person. If we don't have that, there's no criminal justice system, and there's nothing, we can't do much with that, okay? Regardless, as we work through that, we'll stop and question the person who's the suspect, and absent them being wanted or some other issue, we can't physically arrest them. And so it looks weird sometimes, and I come from Wisconsin where we can arrest on misdemeanors not in our presence, so I have to always stop myself because I'm thinking we should have arrested that person, but actually we can't. So, and a lot of people probably don't know that or understand that. So when we do this and we talk to the person who just punched someone and then we let them walk away after we do all our checks and everything, that's the extent that we can do, and then the charges are referred to either a city or state prosecutor. It takes them some time to review those charges and decide if they're going to issue a summons, right, for them to appear in court on that particular incident. That could be how much further down the road. So unless we actually have a felony or one of these other misdemeanors, we don't, or they're wanted, our ability to arrest and take to jail is limited. The other part of that, particularly when we talk about Blair, what's her last name? Witten. Okay. Why is she even out of jail is the question, because she's committed a number of crimes downtown. She's, a number of pending cases. And so I met with the state's attorney's office regarding bail jumping and when someone's out on bail and a pending charge, for folks who are continued repeat offenders, for us to add an additional bail jumping charge on that arrest and attempt to work with the jail to get them held until it's adjudicated and they're sentenced. That doesn't mean they're going to go to jail either. So I mean, there's a whole court process there. But just to understand that the processes here from start to finish for those types of crimes are elongated because we can't make that immediate arrest. So we send the paperwork, it gets reviewed, they get summons to court, and we have to find them to summons them, right? I mean, that doesn't happen automatically. They go to court. Then then it might go to trial and all those things happen. So it's a little slower than some other states where we could take immediate action. So just to be aware of that. Increased presence part. Okay, and we talked about the partnership with Sanford, which I think will be really extremely successful. So we look forward to working with everyone here. This continued meeting that the DROs are doing, they do excellent work. Sergeant Hallison's done a great job of really organizing these things and providing all of you context for even the crimes that occur, because the context is important. If we just look at numbers, just like calls for service, no matter what the crime is, if there's no context to it, it creates a lot of fear that may not be warranted, right? So we know that now we know we've got an issue, not surprising to maybe some of us, with local homeless attacking each other. And then at bar close, sometimes there's an over-serving issue, and we certainly look at that, but some people don't need to be over-served to start fighting with others. They just had a couple drinks and now it's on. So, we work with our licensed premises to address all of that as well, and I think in large part we get real good cooperation. And it's really just like crime. There's a small amount of people who are responsible for crime in our city. There's a small amount of businesses that maybe aren't operating in the best way that they could be, and that's where our focus is. So we don't need to be everywhere. We just need to focus in on those key facilities, locations, if you will. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of throw that out there so everyone had a little more knowledge of what's going on, and I'm happy to take any questions as well. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Chief. So how do we help you change legislature to help you do your jobs more effectively? You guys seem awful handcuffed.
Well, Senator Hogan is chuckling in the back right now. And so, but you got to keep in mind that what sounds like an easy solution would require great criminal justice change in North Dakota, because it would require changes in the state's attorney's processes and their staffing. So when you arrest on misdemeanors right away, that person's got to go before they got to go before the judge in the next day or two, and they have to get their case reviewed by the state's attorney, because they can't just sit there forever, especially on a misdemeanor. So states do things differently. I was trying to Google it, but I don't think there's a good source to tell me how many states do it this way and how many states do it like Wisconsin, and then there's some other hybrids. So I'm not suggesting that that is not the solution, but I just want everyone to understand that's the environment we're in. If we ever got to a place where states' attorneys and courts and all that, because we would need all of them to say, yep, we agree this would work and here's how we would do it, and somewhere along the line, the need for more personnel and resources would come with that. And will that be any better? I don't know. In some instances for us and for you, it would help for us to be able to do that. But, so I'm not suggesting that that's the solution, but that was what would have to happen.
So would it start with a petition and then it goes on from there, or grassroots, where does it start?
Yeah, I think it's you reaching out to your local representatives, your local state representatives, and having that discussion, because it will involve a lot of different entities, many of whom just won't be in favor because it will be difficult. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but you would really want to build a collaborative coalition of people who were willing to do this, and then how do we lay it out? And so I think a lot of thought and planning. We've got a year and a half before the next session. If it was going to happen, things like that, like some of these other reforms that are brought up, I think are best done in the off session, where everyone can get together and reach out to everyone that's affected, and not when we're in session and suddenly I drop a bill and no one knows anything about it, and now we're in panic because there's things that weren't thought about. So I guess, that's the discussion I would advocate for, building those coalitions now and reaching out to everyone involved and seeing where you're at.
Thank you.
I've been to 2 of these, and these are fabulous, but I think someone missing is the state's attorney office in this office. And so I just texted my husband, who's a team on the state's attorney's team, and said, your team needs to be here to help collaborate and present that, because I think that's a little bit of a missing piece here, because there is a huge partnership, and you're right, their staffing is their biggest issue as well, because they only can take on so many cases. So
Yep, absolutely. And I think even having a city prosecutor here for a future meeting to answer some questions and help facilitate conversation there as well would probably be beneficial for the group. So I think that's a great idea.
You talked a little bit about how your hands are tied, so to speak, in some of the kind of more non-emergency type of things that are happening in the neighborhood in downtown. Is it still beneficial for us to call you in those instances, whether it be some sort of kind of nuisance or public indecency or, something like that. Did you do stuff with that data, and is that beneficial for you, even if you can't make an arrest or actually witness the activity happening?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we strongly encourage you to call for all of those. And even if we can't, the fact that we can't make an arrest doesn't mean we can't do anything. We're still going to talk to that individual. They could be wanted. They may need other resources. Maybe we can hand them off to, get a mental health or homeless shelter, get them in touch with harm reduction. So just that call, it allows us to at least try those other options. It's just that we're not always able to make a physical arrest. So by all means, call. And I would encourage everyone to consider when something happens and the cop goes, hey, are you willing to prosecute? We need that, okay? And it doesn't mean, honestly, how many things go to trial? The state's attorney would probably, and the city prosecutor also, not that many cases go to trial. But if it happens, someone needs to be there, and we need a willing victim to prosecute, to be there for prosecution. And we all need that. And if we don't have that, that's what's hurting us the most. The thought that I don't have, it might not ever happen, but, I might have to take half a day off work because this could go to trial 6 months or a year from now, might be convenient for the person reporting the crime, but what it basically does is put us, we can't do much of anything. The state's attorney or city prosecutor won't issue the crime, and the person walks away scot-free, basically, to continue the crime, right? And so other people could be victimized. And, one of the things that we try and look at is reducing repeat victimization by identifying who's the core group of folks involved in, really serious crimes and going after them. Even in these types of situations, we have repetitive persons who, by virtue of prosecution, might get into some kind of other resource or service that would help them from continuing the same behavior. But if we don't have victims to go, hey, yeah, I'll prosecute, knowing at some point I might have to go to court, probably not, but I might. That opens up all those options. But we see a lot of, for whatever reason, folks just don't want to do that, and that kind of ends it right there. We could send it over, but it's not going anywhere.
Chief, I have an addition to that as well. Most of the businesses downtown are familiar with myself or our division, and we regularly are meeting with business owners to make sure that they have our contact information. For example, Kilborn Group is really good. I have a couple of the ladies in the office that will call me if somebody's sleeping in the alley behind there, or if somebody is just maybe acting a fool on 2nd and Broadway. We just met with American Federal not that long ago to make sure that they had all of our contact information. They actually called us with somebody on their roof. So we're happy to have those meetings so that we can respond to some of those behaviors, so that law enforcement doesn't necessarily have to. Because sometimes it goes a lot better when we respond plain clothes with a relationship than an officer with a badge. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep, good point. Thanks, Jillian. Okay.
I appreciate your discussion about the relationship between criminal behavior and behavioral health. And about 4 years ago, there was a significant legislative push to decriminalize many behavioral health issues. And in most of the state of North Dakota, there is not a program like harm reduction. And because we have harm reduction, which is stunning, which I love them all dearly, we're able to have an alternative. But prior, in 2015, we found that almost 80% of the individuals in our corrections, in our jails and Department of Correction facilities were there primarily because of a mental health issue. And our lack of adequate behavioral health services drives much of this. And we've made some headway, but not enough. Mm-hmm. And so the changing the law on criminalization is going to face pretty significant legislative backing, because we know the problem is really not enough behavioral health services. So this is a statewide discussion that's gone on for at least 4 to 6 years.
Yeah, definitely a big issue. And, things that we need, but as they move through the process, and you're well aware of this, there has to be facilities, money, staff to support that long-term, because that otherwise it can't be successful. But yeah, great. Anything else? Okay, thank you, everyone. Sarge, you have anything?